Story 1. Lena, Mark, Sarah, and Jake had been friends since high school. Every summer, they planned a camping trip to escape their hectic city lives. This year, they decided to venture into a forest that had recently gained notoriety among adventurers. Known as the Whispering Pines, the forest was infamous for the eerie whispers heard at night. Despite the rumors, the group was excited. They set out on a sunny Friday afternoon, their car packed with camping gear and enough food for a weekend. The drive was long, but the scenery was breathtaking. As they drove deeper into the forest, the sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting long shadows on the narrow dirt road. They reached the designated campsite just before dusk. The air was cool and filled with the scent of pine. They quickly set up their tents and gathered around a campfire. As darkness enveloped the forest, they shared stories and laughed, feeling the tension of city life melt away. That night, as they lay in their tents, Lena was the first to hear it. A faint whisper, so soft she thought it might be her imagination. She sat up, straining to hear more clearly. The whisper seemed to be calling her name. Lena, Lena. She shook her head, convincing herself it was just the wind. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She unzipped her tent and stepped out. The night was eerily silent, the campfire reduced to glowing embers. She glanced around but saw nothing unusual. The next morning, Lena told the others about the whispers. Jake laughed it off, attributing it to an overactive imagination. Mark and Sarah, however, admitted they had heard something too, but had chosen to ignore it. Determined not to let a few creepy sounds ruin their trip, they spent the day hiking and exploring the forest. As evening approached, they returned to their campsite. The mood was lighter, and they joked about the whispers over dinner. But that night, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. They seemed to be all around them, speaking in hushed tones, revealing secrets only they knew. Mark, your fear. Lena, your regret. Panic set in. Jake, the skeptic, was the first to disappear. One moment he was by the campfire, and the next he was gone. The others searched frantically, calling his name, but the forest responded only with more whispers. Sarah was next. She had wandered off to gather firewood and never returned. Mark and Lena were terrified. They stayed close, clutching each other as the whispers grew louder, more menacing. Lena! Mark! Join us! Their flashlights flickered and died. In the darkness, they felt unseen eyes watching them, felt a cold presence closing in. Mark suggested they head back to the car, but the whispers seemed to mock them, guiding them deeper into the forest instead. They stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. The whispers were deafening now, coming from within. Desperate and out of options, they entered the cabin. Inside, they found old photographs of people who had gone missing in the forest, their faces twisted in terror. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The silence was suffocating. Then they heard it, footsteps behind them. They turned, and there stood Jake and Sarah, their eyes vacant, their bodies moving unnaturally. Join us, they whispered in unison. Mark and Lena screamed and ran. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. They sped away, not daring to look back. When they finally reached civilization, they reported their friends missing. The authorities searched the forest but found no trace of Jake and Sarah, nor any sign of the whispers. Mark and Lena never spoke of that night again. They had fled the Whispering Pines, leaving behind their friends and the terrifying memories that would haunt them forever. Story 2. A group of 5 explorers, Ben, Sarah, Mike, Jessica, and David, were known for their passion for uncovering hidden places and forgotten histories. They had explored abandoned buildings, ghost towns, and remote ruins, always eager for the next big discovery. When they heard rumors of a village deep in the wilderness that had mysteriously vanished, they couldn't resist the challenge. The village, known as Ravenswood, was said to have been a thriving community until one fateful night when it disappeared without a trace. According to legend, the villagers were cursed by an ancient spirit, and those who ventured into the village never returned. The explorers dismissed these tales as folklore, confident in their abilities and equipment. They set out on a crisp autumn morning equipped with camping gear, maps, and cameras. The journey to Ravenswood was arduous, involving a long hike through dense forests and treacherous terrain. As they approached the village's supposed location, the forest grew darker, and an eerie silence enveloped them. When they finally arrived, they found a clearing with the remains of old buildings, overgrown with vegetation. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and an oppressive atmosphere hung over the place. Despite the unease, they were excited by the discovery and set up camp in the center of the village. As night fell, strange things began to happen. They heard faint voices whispering in the wind, shadows moved in the corner of their vision, and their equipment malfunctioned. Sarah, who was filming their exploration, captured fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures in her footage. The next morning, they found their supplies scattered, as if someone or something had rifled through them during the night. Ben dismissed it as animals, but the others were not so sure. Jessica found an old diary in one of the ruined houses, its pages filled with frantic scribbles about a curse and warnings to leave the village. That night, they gathered around the campfire, reading the diary aloud. The entries grew more desperate, describing how the villagers were haunted by a malevolent spirit that drove them to madness and despair. As they read the final entry, a chill ran through the group. "It's here. We're all doomed." Suddenly, the fire flickered and went out. The air grew cold and the whispers grew louder, forming coherent words. "Leave, or suffer the same fate." The explorers' flashlights revealed ghostly figures surrounding them, their faces twisted in pain and fear. Panic set in as the spirits closed in. Mike tried to run, but an unseen force pulled him back. Sarah screamed as a cold hand brushed her face. Ben, in a desperate attempt to protect his friend, swung his flashlight at the nearest spirit, but it passed through harmlessly. David, clutching the diary, realized that the only way to break the curse was to offer an apology and a tribute to the spirit. He urged the group to follow him to the village's ancient well, where the final entry mentioned the spirit's resting place. With the spirits closing in, they reached the well. David placed the diary on the edge and, remembering a story his grandmother told him, began to recite a prayer for peace and forgiveness. The others joined in, their voices trembling with fear. The spirits paused, their forms wavering. The air grew still, and a sense of calm began to spread. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the ghostly figures began to fade. "You have acknowledged our suffering," a voice whispered. "You may go." The explorers felt a sudden sense of release. They quickly gathered their belongings and left the village, the spirits watching silently as they departed. They hiked back to civilization, their hearts heavy with the memory of what they had experienced. They reported the vanishing village to the authorities, but when a team was sent to investigate, they found no trace of the explorers' camp or the old buildings. The village of Ravenswood remained a mystery, its dark history hidden deep within the forest, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to seek it out. Story 3. The small town of Pinecrest was known for its picturesque scenery, friendly locals, and its centerpiece, a serene lake surrounded by dense forest. The lake, however, had a dark history. Locals whispered about strange occurrences and disappearances dating back decades. The lake was said to be cursed, and those who ventured too close risked never returning. Jake, a local historian, and his wife Rachel were fascinated by the lake's mysteries. They decided to spend a weekend at an old cabin on the lake's edge to investigate the stories and document their findings. They were accompanied by their teenage son, Tom, and his friend, Lisa, who were eager for an adventure. The cabin was charming but weathered, with creaking floorboards and dusty windows. It had been abandoned for years, and the locals avoided it due to its proximity to the cursed lake. Despite its eerie reputation, the family settled in, excited about the days ahead. The first day was uneventful. They explored the lake, took pictures, and collected samples. As the sun set, the forest grew silent and a thick fog rolled in from the lake. That night, they heard strange sounds outside the cabin, soft whispers and splashes in the water. Tom and Lisa, curious and undeterred, decided to explore the lake under the cover of darkness. Armed with flashlights, they sneaked out while Jake and Rachel were asleep. The lake looked different at night, darker, more menacing. As they approached the water's edge, they saw something move beneath the surface. Lisa shone her flashlight into the water, revealing a pale, ghostly face staring back at them. They screamed and ran back to the cabin, their hearts pounding with fear. Jake and Rachel were awakened by the commotion. Tom and Lisa breathlessly recounted their encounter, but Jake dismissed it as their imaginations running wild. However, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, they found strange symbols carved into the trees around the cabin. Jake recognized them from his research, ancient runes associated with dark rituals and curses. As they examined the carvings, the temperature dropped, and a chilling wind blew from the lake. Determined to uncover the truth, Jake and Rachel decided to visit the old lighthouse on the lake's far side. According to legend, the lighthouse keeper had disappeared mysteriously, leaving behind only his journal. They hoped the journal would provide clues about the lake's curse. The hike to the lighthouse was treacherous. The forest seemed to close in around them, and the whispers grew louder. When they finally reached the lighthouse, they found it in ruins. Inside, they discovered the keeper's journal, its pages filled with frantic entries about dark shadows and ghostly apparitions rising from the lake. As they read, the whispers turned into anguished cries. The cabin shook, and the lights flickered. They realized that the curse was real and that they were in grave danger. They rushed back to the cabin, but the spirits of the lake had awakened. The lake's water began to rise, creeping towards the cabin. Ghostly figures emerged from the mist, their eyes hollow and their faces twisted in pain. They reached out with cold, clammy hands, their voices a chorus of despair. Tom and Lisa screamed as the spirits surrounded them. Rachel, remembering an old protection ritual from her grandmother, grabbed a piece of chalk and began drawing protective symbols on the cabin's floor. Jake and the kids joined her, their hands shaking with fear. As they completed the ritual, the spirits recoiled, their forms flickering. The air grew thick with tension, and the cabin seemed to vibrate with dark energy. The water receded, and the spirits' cries grew fainter. "You must leave," a ghostly voice whispered. "The curse cannot be broken. Leave, and never return." With their hearts pounding, the family grabbed their belongings and fled the cabin. They drove away, the memory of the cursed lake haunting their minds. They reported their experience to the local authorities, but no one believed them. The lake remained a dark and sinister place, its secrets hidden beneath the water, waiting for the next unwary souls to uncover them.